Great to have you here today, Benedict.
Great to be here.
Talk to us first of all about your background, your musical background, and how you got into composing.
Okay, sure, yeah, no problem. I mean, my background largely was the kind of classical background. I grew up, my mother used to teach music as well. So I learned to read, I studied music as well at school. I did it, I think there were only two of us who studied music in secondary school. It was Colin Rose. He was amazing at the violin. He was Jewish. He was just incredible player. Had that admiration of everyone. Then there was me following up on the cello. Not that great, but you know. So I used to. So I learned all the things of learning to read and write music, and so I played cello, piano, percussion, not all at the same time, but yeah. And I loved. I think when I started to compose, I just loved that side more than anything. So I never felt I was really good at playing. I mean, I played in different orchestras and everything when I was young, but I never really felt I was good enough a player to be, you know, sort of trying to go for the front desk, you know, playing, leading and all that kind of side. But composing I loved. So at first mine was always from the classical side. And when I actually started, eventually I did a PGCE in music. So I taught music in southeast London in quite a rough school, and I enjoyed teaching, sharing the music and everything. I don't know if I quite, and the students were quite characterful, but I don't know if I really like the kind of institute of the school where they have to actually be doing this, whatever, you know. But so that's where I taught the music, and
there's a common theme, by the way, in the film and in discussions we've had previously about the teaching profession being very challenging. So it's quite amusing, once again, the difficulty of teaching students.
I still think I love actually teaching, the actual process of teaching, but I think it was the fact that they were forced to, you know, you actually teach the whole school. And often when I've mentioned actually the teaching side, because later I'm kind of mixing all these different things up, but when I actually was teaching at the school, it was, I also actually composed during the night. So from midnight till 2 in the morning, I composed something called, what I named, a musical fable dance. So it's musical because it's got a kind of, it's got a story. It's a fable because the characters start off as animals and then carry on with those animal traits, which fits in very much with the mythologies of different parts of the world. And then it's dance because it's all dance. So I composed that. So that was kind of my creative outlet, you could say. And and later, funnily enough, just in relation to the music side, later I actually, because I taught English as a foreign language before and I studied a Cambridge certificate and everything, I got that. I was taken on later as producer of the actors on Second Life, where I was actually teaching people English, but as this a musician who was doing very well, who owned this big mansion, had the helicopter and all the rest, and I'd actually, the students, we would take a song of their choice, we would analyze the song, and then I would teach them to sing it, which is kind of crazy. So, so I used it in different ways, and I loved that side, and the students loved it as well, because they were taking songs they liked. What was quite interesting with that, because there was a delay from different parts of the world, the people from, you know, from China, from South America, from, you know, all over the world who were taking part. And there would be a slight delay, slightly different with the different people. So I got them to turn down their volumes. I mean, I listened to everyone, I could still keep going. But yeah, so I mean, I liked that side as well. And the actual teaching process I do like, but it's always an element of if they actually want to do it, you know what I mean? Which I didn't like the fact that it was forced, really, at schools.
In terms of the composing, though, is that something that came to you at a young age?
Yes.
Was there a particular moment you had where you were exposed to, you know, film music or a certain composer, and you know, where did it come from?
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
And just talk to us about your journey from that moment to kind of where you've got up to now.
I think it was Fantasia. which was that film which was, I think it was 1969, one of the very early ones. I loved that. And of course, again, it was the classical composer that I'd listened to, and it was put in that context of the animation, and I loved that. And I realized that I did love the whole thing of the acting and going towards the film side. It was when I was at school, I did some acting, and I felt this great kind of liberty of being able to express myself on stage as well. So I loved that side. But it was never, in the end of the day, being as an actor. It was always expressing it in a different way, and of course that was through the music. And music as well really does move me, you know. So I get quite emotional when I'm listening to music, and also when I'm watching. It could be a sci-fi series or movie. I'm really moved by the music. It's just phenomenal. So yeah. So that was from an early age. So that was when I was in. I mean, I did. You know, I played and everything when I was in primary school, and I did love music. Then, of course, it was a combination of the music and the scenes and everything. Later on, when I was taking part and I was training as an actor and everything, and I was often taken on as a composer for the music to go along with the theatre. But I think what I aspired to more than anything was the film, because of course you've got everything there, it's recorded, you know, they're processed, all these different things you can do, which is phenomenal. And my eldest daughter Phoebe, she's gone into film, which is not surprising. She's the director, and she's and often when I'm talking to her, I'll be talking about the message which is coming across with the film, with you know, those kind of things. And I often feel that that's important, that people walk away with something, you know, at the end of the day. You know, whether it's, you know, I don't know, the future where you've got robots or whatever, and it's kind of like some kind of communication or sort of, so it was always that kind of thing which was quite important, what is communicated.
You got a favourite film score?
Yes, I think probably my favourite is James Horner's Avatar, and it was particularly, again, it was the theme. I love the sci-fi thing, and it was, I don't, you know, don't get me wrong, I mean, you know, the Terminator and all the rest, the great films, but I got very tired of where it's us against them. I always prefer the one where we're trying to work out something in between, you know. I mean, a little bit like Star Trek and everything, where you're kind of going out there to explore the world and everything, but also trying to find a common ground to kind of, which to a certain extent as well as with the teaching, you're trying to find a common ground when you're working with them. So I always liked that element where, and there of course you've got them going across to another planet, and you've got the one person who's at first very military or you know ready to fight against them, but gradually gets to know the community and really loves that community, and then eventually, you know, wants to stay, and then of course the transition when he actually becomes one of them. So I mean, like, again, of course, it's a message as well. But I do love. I mean, James Horner, sadly, he's died. He crashed in his plane, but he was a great composer as well, and he did so many different films as well. So I did like his music.
I think. As far as I know, I might be wrong, but I think the Titanic score is the highest selling film soundtrack of all time.
Yeah.
And I certainly, you know, will listen to, I put the score on for Aliens.
yes.
To kind of get the sort of dopamine going.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, when you're working on something.
Absolutely.
And it's just such an incredible score.
Absolutely.
Those sounds that he created were just fabulous.
Yes.
And the fact he did that under pressure.
Yes.
Was just remarkable.
There's one James Horner, I can't remember the name. It's actually set in, and again, I love to a large extent with all the different stories. One of the things is the native tribes as well. I do feel there's a lot of things we need to learn from them and everything. And in this particular one, sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but this guy who's in relationship with this lady who's Native American, and so then she's bitten or something by this snake, and he had this kind of motif which just sounded great. And it was I suppose it wasn't a sound you normally heard, so it was almost creating that kind of sound. I think it was played by an actual instrument, And I think a lot of composers for films, they're going for those kind of really sounds which you haven't heard before. I mean, Hans Zimmer, which I know I mentioned a lot when I was working with you, I do admire his music as well, and I always just, I listen for the music. If it just comes across to me, if it kind of moves me, then I listen to it a lot. And he does do a lot of synthesized sound, but he does it at a different level. It doesn't sound sort of electronic. I mean, obviously sometimes he can make electronic music, but sometimes he really makes, you know, with the wavelength and all the rest. I must admit, it's a little bit beyond me because I find it quite difficult to to be able to do that. I've got the one he uses, Uher Zebra, for example, he uses. But to actually know exactly what you're doing with all the different things, it's very, very complicated.
I mean, the choice of instruments and finding those unique sounds is such an important part of the process when you're composing a film. And I think with Black Daruma, there was a certain motif that, we came up with and, you came up with for Mr. Lucky, the doll, like a cheeky sound. When you feel that the scene was turning, there was a shift, something otherworldly or supernatural. There was a shift of power within the scene. There was a sound that you put in there that signified that, and I thought that was fantastic the way you came up with that. I mean, how did you come up with that?
Well, I mean, largely I wish I had the time to be able to actually create a sound myself with a wavelength and the knowledge to be able to do that. But largely, there are a lot of sample libraries that you can use. So I was using, I can't remember, East, West, or one of these different ones where they've come up with different sounds. So I was going through all the different ones. And that one was actually what's called a waterphone. It is actually an instrument with the pipes and everything, and it's but yeah, the waterphone is, and I listened to that, and it was particularly, it's almost like the childlike element, the innocent-like element, and I thought particularly with the Black Daruma, it was kind of like, this is the way it came across, and almost kind of allured the person who was caught up by this, and it was that kind of sort of like childlike element. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little kind of Freddy Krueger's sort of horror kind of element. So I heard that, and it's funny when you're listening to these things. You go through. There's so many different samples you're going through, and then that sounds good. That sounds good. I mean, there were also the Japanese drums as well. You guys mentioned as well. So I listened to particularly the taiki drums, particularly for those as well. So I was working with those. But it was that one particularly, I just thought that fits.
So you mentioned the main theme for Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
Now, I can't remember during the process that we mentioned that, but as soon as you mentioned that, before we began talking now, I thought, gosh, that has got that, children's song element to it. Like that little, the little song about Freddy. And was that something that you had in mind when you were composing the film? I mean, this is an interesting question, I think, is that how much of the process is subconscious?
I think a lot is subconscious. I mean, the interesting thing is, because when you're composing, it's a little bit like a blank sheet. So you've got a lot of references. So I think the first one, I was using Hans Zimmer's, I think it was particularly Interstellar, the kind of remoteness, that kind of sound. When she's in bed, she sees the Black Daruma and takes it out of the room and puts it into the bathroom. That scene. But it was kind of like, I wanted to have that sort of heartbeat with the taiki drums and everything, and coming in with that and everything. But it was kind of that remote sort of sound. So that was pre-planned. But the interesting thing is, a lot more comes through when it just comes to you almost. And I wasn't actually thinking anything to do with Freddy Krueger or anything like that. So it's an interesting element. I was actually doing some composing recently. Sorry, not for this film, but another one. And I was kind of coming up with this is so, and I was kind of using references a lot. And then I came up with this rhythm, which worked really well. And then it was like, okay, hang on, I need to get the meter. So I had to change around till I could fit in with them. So once you actually get these ideas, often they kind of You need to fit them in to the different sides. So no, it wasn't, it just came up and then I heard it, just worked, and then I kind of put it in. So a lot of that comes through, you know what I mean, when you're playing around with the different ideas. And a lot of, what I find really interesting is when you go to, I mean, you know what I mean, when I used to teach music and they would talk about classical composers, they go, oh, they're dead composers. And like, you don't have to see them that way, you know what I mean? It was very alive, their music. But the interesting thing as well is you got sort of like jazz musicians, they improvise. I mean, when I went to school back in South Africa, in Cape Town, I remember I used to be usher for the Baxter Theatre. And I remember there was particularly this jazz performance. And one kid who was like 3 years younger than me, he was there with a keyboard. He was able to look around, improvise, and I was just like, wow, that's amazing to be able to improvise like that. I mean, obviously I've learned through time to sort of learn improvising skills, but it takes a long time. But it was amazing with the jazz because they would put it together, they know the certain things, and then they could actually improvise. But one of the big things, what I'm saying is that with the classical composers, they used to improvise masses then. I mean, for example, Bach as well, he used to put down certain chords and then they would improvise and then they would come up with a different idea. So it's kind of largely, at that moment, you come up with the different things.
So I mean, it's interesting you say that kind of process fed into the film because the film is highly improvised.
Yeah.
We were talking,
Yeah.
Before about how, we didn't even have a script until later on, till after the auditions.
Yes.
So, the actors came to audition and we gave them a guide for what the scene would be.
Absolutely.
And they created their own.
Yes.
And then when we selected the actors we wanted to work with, we then used the auditions to write the script.
Yeah.
And the whole thing's been interesting because, we wanted to do something within the, the horror genre.
Yeah.
We wanted to work within doll horror.
And
the thing with doll horror is that we thought, well, we want to do something different with that and have a POV, everything seen from the perspective of this Japanese luck doll.
Yes.
We didn't know that Japanese luck dolls actually existed.
Yeah.
Until after we'd made the film,
Yeah.
pretty much, or later in the process, we realised there's something called a Daruma doll.
Yeah.
So the whole process has been one of discovery.
Yes.
And from our point of view,
that's the lovely part of it.
it's a lovely part of it, and I think from our point of view, helping shape the music and direct how that's going to be is a fantastic part. It's like putting the icing on the cake.
Absolutely.
But I think that there's a mystery about how a composer works.
Yes.
And what you're bringing to it, and how much of the process is conscious or subconscious.
Yes.
And I think that is that something you've thought a lot about? Do you look at other composers and how they work?
Yes.
Or is it something you are just inventing yourself, the process, as you approach a film score?
I did Hans Zimmer's masterclass, for example. It's a great masterclass, and it really does take you through the different things. But the great thing is that, I mean, what Hans Zimmer there says, it's great if you can work with the directors and the writers right from the beginning, and I completely agree. The difficulty is you don't always have that opportunity, but it was great with yours because you'd filmed it, you got all the stuff, so I had some time anyway to work through it. So, I mean, I think it's a very important process going through all the different things, and you need to improvise and play around the different ideas. And what is quite funny is I improvised the different things and I came up with this scale, and I was like, what is this scale? This is breaking all the rules. It doesn't, and eventually I discovered it was Phrygian dominant, which had that kind of Eastern element of da 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 da, but it was kind of like in the.
Just to stop you there, what does Phrygian dominant mean?
It sounds like a character out of Dune or something.
It sounds like something from Flash Gordon.
It's a mode. So a mode is when you have, let's say, C major scale. If you start on the D, then it's Dorian. So you've got all these different modes, but it's not really going to the root of the scale, but you're starting on different notes. Mm-hmm. So Phrygian is a particular sound which is a particular starting the particular scale. So it sounds like quite eerie, but then you've also got it dominant, so that it's put up. Because what actually happens when you're working with the scale and everything, because I know we've got a bit technical here, but you've got the semitone between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. Now, what actually happens is with the phrygian, what you're doing is you kind of like, it becomes, there's a, so you've got a semitone between the one and the first and second note, and the third and the fourth, and you've got a big jump. So you've got da 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 da. So you've got that kind of, I can't sing it very well, but it kind of, you've got that big jump, and it sounds quite Eastern. So once I got that, I thought, okay, fine, Japanese, you know, this would fit. And of course I did research, and then I discovered it had been used so many different places, you know, Disney Aladdin and all sorts of different films. But at the same time, it was useful. So I came up with that, and also one of the instruments, and of course this is a process, you sometimes need to throw some stuff aside. I came up with, for example, duduk, which is an instrument, for example, Hans Zimmer's used a lot. He used a lot in Dune, for example, and they add a bit of piping to it. There's an amazing soloist who plays it and everything. And it's got a sound of its own because of this little you know, tubing they added that they got from IKEA or whatever, £2. So they created this own particular sound. I mean,
I can't believe he's mentioned IKEA. We happened to mention IKEA in a previous interview that came in with the reproduction furniture and the set design. So you know, if anybody works from IKEA wants to sponsor this YouTube channel,
there we go,
we're up for that. There's a whole Fight Club story as well.
Well, I'm actually taking it from Hans Zimmer. Actually mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned the Hans, you know, IKEA, but anyway, but it's kind of like, so I thought, okay, fine, it's a great instrument. What I liked about it, it is Eastern kind of Oriental sort of sound to it, but there's also, you play the note and it just gets louder and louder, and of course it is a wind instrument. So I did use that for the theme, and I do remember, of course, when you listened to it, when I brought you into the studio and everything, played it, and they were like, you were like, no, it's not that instrument. I was like, really? Because I've gone through so many instruments. So I tried that, and then of course there was the trance scene as well, the trance music. Try some of those, but then of course it was too bright. So it was kind of, it's always got to be what Hans Zimmer says as well. You've got to go towards the vision that the directors have. Of course, obviously, yes, you're composing, and of course it's your music, but the whole point is for you guys. It's for the directors, which is so important.
I mean, what's interesting about, you know, this process as well is that we originally we were playing much more to a authentic found footage film that didn't have any music on it.
Yeah.
And we did the test screening, and the test screening was a washout. Like, people were walking out, they were bringing in food. It wasn't well, organised, for one thing. We didn't even get charged for it finally, because I think they knew how bad. And you know the people who helped organise that. But, we'll let them off.
Yeah.
But you know, the projector wasn't right.
Yeah.
But also the film felt very flat, and we had people, you know, fill out feedback forms.
Yeah.
And there was some positive stuff. It wasn't all bad.
No.
But I think the consensus we came up with there was that we needed some music. Yeah. So the music wasn't part of the original vision for the film.
No.
But then it became, actually, in many ways, the thing that saved the film. So it's like I said to you, you can put that on your T-shirt that the music saved the film.
Which is great, yeah.
I think that, you know, it'd be interesting to ask you at this point, like, you know, what do you think of the horror genre? In particular, do you know much about found footage and dogma cinema and the way this film was constructed? And when we brought it to you, what went through your mind when we first spoke to you about this project and we said we want you to?
I think the first
composing.
thing which went through my mind was I wanted to know the composers that you liked. So you did give me access to, obviously, the different composers or the different films you liked. The worst thing is when the director's chosen a piece of sort of set music and put it with that, and then people start to associate it with that. Then the composer is very difficult to yank them away from that across to what they've composed, which is something different. Now, of course, it wasn't that case with you. You just gave me references to the different composers. So I listened to the different things. I picked up certain elements. But at the end of the day, I didn't really pick up anything I could really walk away with to actually use. So at the end of the day, I was really, it was working with the actual recording, going through, and of course you put it into a loop. So it's quite funny, I used Cubase, so I kind of duplicated it like 5 times. I could come up with all sorts of, the end of the day I only came up with once or twice, you know. I used the different versions. And it was and it was kind of going through it. It was using reference stuff, so reference according to what touched me, I suppose. Because at the end of the day, I needed to understand why that kind of thing fitted, and so it's a really interesting thing. There's, it's kind of like you have the kind of, you think this would be good, so you put the reference music there just above the movie, so you can switch across to it, listen to it there. So you're kind of going for that kind of sound, and then you kind of like almost copying, but you can, we can't copy. We're really bad as humans at copying. So you kind of like doing it your version, and then your version starts to really come alive after a bit of time, which is really interesting. I mean, there's, you know, there was, of course, it started, the first cue you had was very quiet. Of course, it was in the bedroom. It was an ideal sort of way to start, and you had the heartbeat there and everything, and you had a bit of the sort of ambience kind of feel.
I mean, I remember the discussion we had. Now it's coming to me as we're talking. This is all a bit of a blur, you know. It's like you kind of get hit in the head and wake up and there's a film. But it's coming back to me now, some of the discussions we had about what this film was, and there is a kind of dance between it being a paranormal film,
yes,
and being like a black humoured film that's more psychological.
Yes,
so
that's right. Yeah,
one of the references was, it's like Paranormal Activity,
yeah,
but it ends up not being that, and we're unsure. Is there something supernatural going on, or is there not something supernatural going on? And certainly that early scene,
yes,
in the bedroom, it was very hard to know how much music to put in that. Is it sound design? Is it music? And it was very difficult, but interesting to explore what it is, because it's not a film that's easy to to define in terms of genre and what it is.
So when you're interpreting it, when you're going through it, sometimes as a composer you will see different things in it. That maybe I mean, obviously, always it's got to fit according to what you want. Yes, I agree. But there's sometimes some nuances which are.
I mean, you know, we've always been inspired by spiritual horror.
Yes. Yeah.
In a sense, and one of our favourite films has always been Candyman.
Yes.
I saw Candyman in when I was probably about 7 years old.
Yeah.
At a sleepover.
As you do.
A friend of mine, his older brother, rented
you
it from the
remember
video
that from
store.
Many Sleepless Nights?
Yes, of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And it had such an impact because one, you were at that age where, you know, you're hypersensitive to things.
Yeah.
You don't really conceptualize evil or darkness, but you
yeah.
might have a subconscious feeling of
Yeah.
things aren't quite right. But it was the music at the beginning, the Philip Glass music at the
Yeah.
beginning, and the aerial shot
Yeah.
and the bees was so powerful. And and of course that was one of the references we gave you. We
That's
said we
right,
want
that's
you
right.
to
Yeah,
needs to be a feeling in the film of something spiritual, something otherworldly that's coming in to this domestic space.
Yes.
And that chanting and that choir music was so distinctive.
Yes.
And, but of course, it's such a powerful reference, and it's not like we can just say, well, that's the reference, and then you go, right, let's get a choir together and reproduce
exactly.
that on a very small budget for any film.
Yeah.
So I do understand you have to be careful with these references.
I mean,
because you can't just replicate things.
No,
and it would
exactly.
be wrong too. But nevertheless, what you did with that was very interesting, because
mine
I think
mine was a heartbeat.
You got the heartbeat.
Instead of the choir, which of course is great for use, and I did have it as one of my instruments. Of course, you've got no end of instruments. But yeah, with that one, it was particularly. I heard what you were saying, but I couldn't quite replicate what you were kind of in that kind of.
I mean,
direction.
I don't think you were familiar with that film or that music, so we
I did
played
listen
it.
to it. I did listen to
I
it.
remember.
I got to listen to all the different tracks, and it, in the end, it was just kind of the heartbeat, which is, of course, the most important thing for all beings. That you've got that heartbeat with that presence there. And of course, when she actually picks up the doll, it gets louder and stronger and faster. Which, of course, again, is because the you know, she's what's she doing? What's she doing with me? You know, kind of thing. So it's kind of like so it's kind of that being element, and to a certain extent as well, when he's actually in the cellar and goes down there really cross and sawing and everything, and So
That would be like the first scene where he
First
goes down
scene
into the cellar.
where he actually
after he's had he's lost the £7,000.
Yeah, that's right.
On his credit card.
He's really cross, gets really cross, speaks and everything, and then takes the doll down and everything, but then starts to read up about the Black Daruma, and that's where I put in the motif, because it's like, hello, here I am. It's kind of like
it was a lot like a hello, you know. It was like the Daruma's voice, wasn't it? Responding.
Exactly. Yeah,
Definitely.
Kind of like, here I am.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, so it's kind of.
It always made me feel like being in an arcade and like,
Yes,
you know,
there's
three
that element, yes. Yeah.
You know, the three bells lining up or something on a, you know, the next level on the game. It's really great sound.
But the interesting thing is, like a game, it's like nothing. But of course, it's almost like that dark stuff behind it all, which of course, gradually you sort of, and I think as well, I mean, there was that scene, and then of course you've got the scene where they're in the cellar where he's completely lost it, you know, where he's, you know, sort of completely sort of blind, sort of suicidal sort of scene. And it's, there of course I combine a lot of different things, and of course taiko drums and everything, all these different things. And, but then also, after that, I think one of the scenes I thought would be absolutely great is because we actually moved it. At first, it was going to be part of the last scene when he actually loses his temper. I won't sort of spoil it for people, but races across with a hammer. But you know, it's going to be for that scene. But we moved it earlier, where you got the actual transformation, where you can actually see Black Daruma's spirit go up into him, and the smile. And I found that was great because it was a very simple sort of tune I could put in there, which fitted in, which was almost like, again, it was like the Black Daruma's melody again, you know. But yeah, again, it's like it's a fascinating thing as well with the kind of horror you've got. There's the kind of like it's just a game, but of course it wasn't. It was the whole time bringing this person more and more under Black Daruma's control.
A sort of dark enchantment.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I think what's great is our early direction for how we want the music to go.
Yeah.
You clearly interpreted that, this sense of spiritual undertones.
Yeah.
And a kind of playful, dark enchantment that runs through the film.
Yeah.
And, you know, that, I think that's essential. I think that obviously that relationship between director and composer.
Yeah.
And being on the same vision for the film, but also having the freedom to experiment and interpret that direction to something that's your own.
Absolutely.
But then you feed back and it becomes greater than, you know, obviously we could certainly come up with ourselves or would be able to do. And that process was fabulous, and that's, you know, we both very pleased with how that went. I think, you know, you've always been a very good listener. Like as soon as we would talk to you about a vision film, you would really listen to that, and immediately then start to, you know, come up with ideas based on that. I mean, how important is that to you to listen to?
Very important, because the whole point is your vision. You both wrote it, and you created it. So of course it is your film. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously it's put together by all the different people taking part, but the point is I've got to really be able to pick up what you're putting across in the film. So it is so vital that I always go back to you. I mean, as you know, I had the instrument duduk, for example, to the Eastern element, but it probably went too far. You listened to it and just said no. And I mean, obviously I resisted a bit. I was like, but I've got this melody in the whole, okay. So I tried to fight against it. Yeah. And then, of course, you were saying maybe the trance music and everything, maybe one of those, and it was like, no, it's too bright. No, it's too bright. And eventually, okay, fine, I'll just keep with these ones. So it was, but the whole point is, it's got to be, at the end of the day, it's got to be your decision. It's got to fit to what you want. Sometimes, obviously, I can take it further, because, I mean, I can take it further with the kind of, you know, like that melody which came up, you know, that kind of came to, I listened to the waterphone and, oh, that sounds...
So that's the Mr. Lucky motif.
That's right, because I had it already as an instrument, because it was that kind of, again, it's that wind element, because of course you've got strings and all the rest. And I mean, I play the cello, but it's the wind instrument which is phenomenal. You can get some, I mean, obviously all instruments are great. I mean, obviously you've got the string orchestra, so many different places, don't get me wrong, not putting down the strings, but the wind is amazing. So the waterphone is got some amazing kind of sounds, and it is actually an instrument. So I played that particular one, and I thought, oh, this would be great for particularly using for the kind of theme, the theme tune. But I mean, it didn't. It's not like it like, oh, that's it. It was like, I'll put it in there, and then I listen to it and oh yes, and then you keep coming back to it and listening to it again, because you keep going through it again and again and again, because it really does become. It becomes a part of you almost, because you are expressing all these different things through the film. And of course, I mean, I think when we had the premiere, I mean, I think all I said to the actors was, I got to know your part really well. After I think I should have said, you were really good in the part, but I just kept on going, yeah, I got to know you. Because of course, that's what happened. I just went through it again and again, and you're picking up nuances and all these different sides. But from a music side, of course, you're telling the tale from the music side.
To be honest, that is one of the most enjoyable parts of the process of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Is putting the music together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it puts the soul into the film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, the music carries the emotion.
Yeah.
And you know, I felt the film didn't really have much of a soul before we decided to work with you and put some music to it. And I went to a point where I hated it. I know it sounds very strong, but I did think, what have we made? It didn't translate in terms of what we wanted it to be.
I mean, there was
a point of, it's like, I guess it's a little bit like, you know, you
love-hate relationship.
Yeah, you have the child, and then you just think, what have I done? I've ruined my life, and it's just way more responsibility than
I never saw you going, there it is, do something with
it.
And
then later on, yeah. I think it is part of the process, but I do remember thinking, this film's so highly experimental, it's either going to work or it's going to fall completely. And I remember thinking, I had a dark time in the process.
But it's like with the music, it's like the process of the music, because you come up with stuff and you think, that just sounds like the reference I've just taken from, I'm copying. But of course, often it's not, because you're using elements of it and you're kind of almost like emulating the different things. And it is becoming your voice in the end. Because no matter what you take on, some sort of nuances of this, nuances of that, at the end of the day, it is, you know what I mean, it's yourself expressing through the music, but taking, and of course the great thing is, of course, you're taking the film, what's there in the film. So you're always working towards that element.
Before working on this film, did you have an appreciation for horror as a genre? Did you think about horror? Had you worked on anything?
I can't say I was really, you know, watched that much of horror, but I mean, I suppose I've always been into sci-fi, and I've watched a lot of sci-fi films, and there's always been the dark element of the sci-fi. I mean, you know, the Batman trilogy, for example, I loved, and I was fascinated with it. I mean, I think it was Batman Begins, the first one, and I remember watching half of that, you know, with the kids and everything, but I was like, wow, there's a depth in this, because I can really feel there's a depth. I mean, often you'll see, you know what I mean, you know, superhero ones, which I love as well, you know, Marvel films, and sometimes you'll see a film and think there's not much depth. But with Batman Begins, there's a lot of depth in that story, and then eventually I watched all of them, and then Dark Knight and everything, and I love that. And I often listen to that when I'm going for my walk. I'll listen to, you know, Dark Knight, and it's the last one, which is A Dark Knight, which is really beautiful, and it's bringing so much of the different things together.
That's a really long track, isn't it? A Dark Knight.
Yeah,
I've listened to that. It's
James
Newton Howard.
James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer. So, again.
Yes.
But that particular last one, I think, was largely Hans Zimmer. So he was taking a lot of those different elements together for the last one.
I mean, there's definitely something profoundly spiritual about
absolutely
that music. I remember going through a really dark time, and it was A Dark Knight Rises.
Yes.
I think it was called Rise, the track.
Yes.
Every time I listened to that, it gave me a feeling of hope.
Yes.
And it was like a medicine for the soul. I remember listening to it many times. I mean, it was almost the only thing that could kind of get through to me at a certain stage I was in.
Absolutely.
A lot of very difficult things have been happening.
Yeah.
I remember Toby telling me a story of being on a Christian kids camp.
Yeah.
And a guy standing up and saying, he at one point he was giving his sort of testimony,
Yeah.
you know, of how he came to faith or belief in God, and he
Yeah,
said
yeah.
that he was considering killing himself.
Yeah, yeah.
I should let you tell this story actually, Tobe. What he said.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm trying to remember now, but I think he said that it was listening to A Dark Knight Rises
Yeah.
is what gave him hope.
Really,
It
yeah.
actually,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, lifted his soul enough
Yeah.
to believe in some kind of a personal resurrection.
Like, had you watched independent horror movies, did you know about films like Paranormal Activity and
Yeah,
Creep and some of the reference movies that we gave you? Had you been exposed to that? Because
a little bit,
there's no right or wrong answer, obviously, to that, but it's
Yeah.
interesting to know now what background you had in terms of your understanding of that genre.
I think it was. I suppose my main side is a kind of like a Marvel kind of like thing where there is the horror element, but they fight against it to a certain extent. And a little bit like with Batman, there's the dark side, and there's always the dark side of the personality, no matter what, that you have to fight against, and you kind of like. So the horror, as it were. No, I haven't been as used to. I loved your concept of the Black Daruma, where it's from a doll. You always see it from the point of view of the doll. I thought that was great, and it was also seeing always from his or her, and imagine this his point of view the whole time, you know. And so no, I mean I don't think I've been that used to watching horror. And sometimes I'll look through, you know, I mean I'll choose films or series. I'm watching the whole every evening. I'm watching something. Funny enough, I've been getting more into series as well, or sci-fi, whatever. And I'll go through and I'm like, nah. And sometimes horror doesn't really appeal to me. But it's kind of like the horror, you know, kind of. It was more kind of like. I don't know. I'm always looking for something where there is that horror element that they're fighting. There's always the good and the bad almost element that you're fighting against almost. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, obviously, yes, it ends up that way with the horror, and that's largely the horror element, isn't it? But still, there's so many elements, of course, in what I've watched and what I love of certain things of the music. There is that element there. And it's always there.
Tell me, you know, when was the first time you actually saw the finished film, and what was your reaction to it when you saw all that work that had gone in with the score and working with us, and what were your feelings about the film? Not being somebody who's that well versed in indie horror, like you said, you mentioned that you know the horror, but more of the Hollywood sort of horror stuff that comes out of big action movies and Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, what was your response to seeing the film?
Are you talking about when we saw the premiere?
When you saw the premiere, was that the first time you saw it?
Complete, yes. I think the main feeling I had when I went to watch it, the premiere, I knew it went through the sound editor, so I was very worried. So I think I was very tense, but at the same time, it was great actually having the audience as well watching it. You could really feel the ambience, the feeling they were catching up with the film. I think it was great. I mean, I was worried, of course, because it was my music there. I think that was the biggest element which I remember most, quite tense. But it was great afterwards as well, speaking to the people, as you know, the actors, the people who come to see it. It was really nice because, of course, you know, that's my music. That's what I composed. That's what I put together. But getting positive feedback was really nice, you know, because a lot of people really did enjoy it, did really feel quite moved by it.
Well, what did you feel like? What was your response to it? Did you feel unsettled? Did you feel the weird energy in the film? Or
Yes,
did you feel somewhat
yeah.
detached because you spent so long working on the score? Or was it almost like feeling desensitized to the film?
No, I think I was quite drawn into it, but of course I'd worked on it for so many hours already. I was even more, and that's where the tense, the nervous element and tense element came in, because you know there was so much I'd conveyed there. It was almost like it was me there. I mean, obviously I wasn't there on the stage or anything like that. They couldn't see who'd composed it, but it was so much an important part of me, because of course I'd worked on it so much.
And talk us through a moment in the film that was the most exciting to watch and to feel the room and to hear the music and to see it unfold? Was there a particular scene that really made you think, oh wow, that really did come together well?
Well, actually, there's kind of like three ones. The first one I loved was when she's in
Louise?
bed. That she goes across to the doll and actually picks up the doll. That I loved because that was the first entrance of the music, and it was very not much music at all, and the heartbeat and it was kind of really underneath. I loved that part. The second part was when they go down the stairs and then they discover him and he's absolutely gone crazy, and I love that because it's a there's a combination of so many different elements put into it, and there's like all of those things coming through. And then the third one I loved as well was when he's looking down at the doll burning there, and then that smile comes to. I never really noticed it till, of course, went into more detail, and I saw that smile on his face, and you realise that the spirit has come in and taken over his body, and that's when I went for a very simple melody, and that particular one I loved.
I mean, that felt very much like a funeral.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was definitely that otherworldly feeling of something going up to rising up.
It was, but I felt it was almost like, what's this body that I now have control of, almost element, because it was the I suppose in some way the funeral, but it was the leaving of the spirit and taking over the body. It's almost like a birth, almost like the phoenix, the burning, and then of course the new life.
Like a dark resurrection.
Yeah.
I got that vibe from it as well. Yeah.
I think for me the most exciting part of the film in terms of the music, where the music is coming together in such a powerful way with the story and the action, is when Darren and Ryan have been in the car smoking weed, and then it cuts out of that scene and they're suddenly running through the tunnel and you hear the train coming over. And just as you cut from that moment in the tunnel to them arriving on the bridge, there's these two, I think it's like two drums that go dun dun, and then you're into this kind of angelic trance thing. And we discovered that motif that was really, I don't know, strangely, it was like Candyman, like we talked about that reference, and very bizarre and trance-like. And for me, that moment is where all the energy building in this kind of confusing, like what's going to happen, what's happening to this bloke, starts to come together in this strange encounter with Ross. And every time I watch that, I get this kind of chill going through me.
And you've got the element of the trance music as well as the spliff and everything. And everything's going slightly AWOL.
Suddenly you start to think, I don't know where this film's going to go. And that's a brilliant place to have an audience in terms of horror. For people to think it's starting to make sense, but also it doesn't make any sense as to what's going to happen next. It's not predictable. I think that's a really great place.
And then you've also got remember when the doll's thrown into the water?
Yeah.
And then of course you have the other instruments coming in, but still the trance music is there, which is kind of like...
It's a hell of a journey. I can't remember when the music exactly starts. Does it start on the park bench or is it in the car?
It's in the car.
I remember this discussion about it being from the kind of homemade trance on the radio, or some tape maybe that Darren's made.
Yes, that's right.
As kind of diegetic music. So like occurring within, if anybody doesn't know what that means, but occurring within the actual world of the film. Then to becoming non-diegetic, to being to moving gradually into a score of this big rant about society and what's happening with men and who the hell are we are, an existential situation.
It was great, that side of starting off in the car, which is very much kind of like the car sound, of someone playing a track, to going out when they are running and everything, and they're going slightly crazy. Which of course, and then of course you got the expanse suddenly into the full, which I enjoyed doing. So.
I think that those scenes are really playful, really fun. And they're desperately needed because you break out of that, claustrophobic environment.
Yes, that's right. As contrast as well.
Contrast.
Yeah.
And I walk there all the time to get to our office, and I always chuckle to myself when they go into that bridge. Like a train went over the other day, and I just immediately am transported into that scene with Darren.
Mm.
And it's almost like the power that he has there, which he's very conscious of with the doll, and he's just got the job, and he's just had the spliff. Then he's going back, and then suddenly his wife is really angry, just come from a phone call. And it's like, I love that scene as well, where it's kind of like, oh my God, you know, and it was kind of, you know, with the drums and everything, and building up, and the elements of the kind of the sounds which of the doll getting really angry underneath, which is you know, when she gets really cross, and she's kind of almost making fun of him.
Yeah.
And the doll.
Yeah. I love in that scene, that dinner scene. It's like a 6 or 7 minute long scene of two people talking in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I love the way the music sort of supercharges that, and you feel this back and forth between them, because the music comes in and out. It will just suddenly fade out, and then it comes back in with that dum 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 heartbeat.
Yeah.
And I think that really starts to bring together their relationship, because up until now it's been this domestic conflict of throw away the doll, you know, don't be stupid, get focused, take responsibility, be an adult. But now it's like, is this guy mentally ill, or is there something spiritually wrong?
Well, you see,
and it's like becomes really serious.
You see it particularly when he goes racing up the stairs and starts doing push-ups.
Yeah.
And by then, of course, everything's going really, and of course, then the taiko drum is just going crazy.
Yeah.
Because and then you go across into the next scene, which you know what I mean, and then of course there's the introduction of the mother, and him using the mother. You know what I mean, and it's kind of, because by then he's quite far gone, and then of course being discovered, and it's great with those different elements of as things step up towards him losing his mind completely.
Yeah.
So previously you've done some composing competitions and short films and various things, but this is your first
film.
Feature film.
Yes, indeed.
Did you come into it confident? Did you know what the process was going to be, or was it one of discovery and finding your feet?
It's a little bit like Hans Zimmer says. It's like every single film is like a blank sheet. So to a large extent, when you first gave it to me, it was great, because I thought horror movie is ideal. So your film was a great element that I could use it to go for the sound, and the kind of like almost the spirit behind it.
I think that in the film, that's interesting you said that, because I think in the film there's a kind of subtle line between what's music and what's sound design.
Yes.
Because the score's quite minimalist.
Yes.
In a certain sense.
And that's what you wanted right from the beginning, which was actually quite convenient for me. And whilst I had a theme tune, which was Duduk, and you didn't eventually want Duduk, I was a bit like, no, but that's the only tune I've got. But at the same time, it was quite useful, because it's pushing me to new areas where it's much more towards. I mean, the interesting thing as well, if you listen to, I think it's The Dark Knight, for example. I often listen to it when I'm walking around and running. I've heard it's very interesting, but it starts very much on the percussion side. It goes very much with those kind of sounds. There's hardly any melody, and then gradually the melody is built on top of that, which is an interesting element as well. So it's kind of like going the reverse way from what I'm used to. Of course, a composer, okay, what chords, what instruments, but this is kind of going like the percussion side, the sound side. So whilst you wanted it less that, so I kind of, in the end, it kind of worked out, and I managed to find an interim where I could compose stuff which still had enough sort of, like, you know, the tune and everything of, Black Daruma, and I could have those little elements of it, but, you know, more kind of the taiko drums and everything, taiko drums.
When we first approached you to score the film, we gave you the story and we said, so this is a film, it's like found footage, there's dogma elements to it, it's experimental, it's got black humour in it. What did you think? When we said this is what the film is and we explained all these elements, what was your response?
Well, it's interesting, when I heard about it, I was fascinated with the side of the Black Daruma, that it's a doll. Again, it's the kind of how it's being communicated. Um, the kind of horror movies that I've been into, of course, are the classic like Psycho, for example. So of course, there's a lot with the music there. You know, so I was very curious to see it immediately. I wanted to see it because you mentioned it quite early on, didn't you? And of course, obviously, I wanted to. It's a great side, of course, when you're working with a film. No matter what the film, you're going to be working on taking it even further, the different layers, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were obviously very reluctant to use music in the film for a long time because we were
Yes.
dead set on this is like a found footage movie. We want it to obey the rules. It's as though someone was just playing back the tape recorded through the doll's eyes,
Yes.
and therefore we don't want any visible or audible sound design or music. But then, you know, we decided actually it doesn't really work. The emotion isn't clear,
No.
and the feeling isn't clear, the tone of it, because it plays so much on that line between comedy, between horror, psychological,
right. Yeah.
supernatural. We needed something to help, and obviously that's where music really comes in.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting challenge, I guess, for you for us to say we want music, but we also don't want music.
Yeah.
So
Just,
you know, have to keep reining it back in.
absolutely. I mean, it was quite useful in some ways. I thought, my God, you know, my first film, masses of music with a full orchestra with this, but I didn't have to do that. So it was quite convenient. It was, okay, fine, I'll just do a little bit. So, and also it did help with, you know, the first one I composed for. You don't really know. You need a third person. What do you think the whole time? I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, obviously, as composer for films, there's a lot of different things of music library writer, and I have, you know, a lot of respect for that, for one way to go into it. But I find it very difficult because I like to be able to speak to people, to the director, does this match your film? I find it a little bit more exciting than when I'm composing this, sending it off to the producer, and then, okay, well, we want these changes. And it feels, I mean, it's just nice when you're working on something together. I mean, I think probably the most fun time when I was working with both of you was the day and a half at the end when I finished all the cues and we were working out the final things on the cues. And that was great because then I had I had you there and I had all the music there, I had all the instruments. Do you want this? Do you want that? Okay, take this out, take that. So I was a bit like, are you sure? Do you want it? Well, then you want, okay, fine, I'll take it out. But I went through all these different things, and so all the cues are finally finished. We went through each cue, and it took a day and a half. And then, of course, we went across to the sound engineer. So, and that was great because it was a film there. This is your film we're working on. So yeah.
You mentioned about taking things further in terms of, you know, a composer coming to a horror film.
Yes.
Your job is to, how do I enhance these moments of horror here?
Yeah.
How do you do that as a composer, and how did you do that in Black Daruma?
I would look through all the different samples that I can find. The problem is it's a time factor. If I had that time to be able to go into that depth, but it's really finding the samples, finding the different instruments that match. And then often when you choose those different instruments, they give you different ideas because you start improvising with those as well, which is great. I always go back to, as well, the piano. So, of course, got the piano, you know what I mean? So when you're improvising, often you're going back to the piano for the tunes, for the chords, and that kind of side. But with yours, particularly as was horror as well, the instruments were so important. I've got to get that nuance, that kind of feel for it. So I would play with those quite a lot, and then of course I would start with different layers and see how they worked together as well. And then also taiko drum you mentioned quite early on. I thought, okay, fine, great, I found it. So of course there's getting all the samples. I mean, it is quite a big process. You're getting all the samples, then you're getting all the kind of different music, the different things that match. And it's not really like, right, music first. No, it doesn't work that way. You kind of add these instruments, then you improvise, then, oh, there maybe that. You choose an instrument, and then you go, oh, I like that sound. With the waterphone, it was like, you know, oh, I could use that, so let me just take it down. And you start writing creative notes. Okay, there's that one. And maybe you record a little bit of it on this note. You know what I mean? So you can come back to it. And it's that kind of building, and experimenting.
It sounds similar to me to the writing process that
Yeah.
we go through when we do our story development together
Yeah.
is that you just need to start.
Yeah.
You put all your clay on the table,
Yeah.
and then you start removing it, and you find
Yeah.
within that is something that works. But sometimes to get things going, you just have to do the most obvious thing.
Yes.
So you come up with the most cliche
Exactly.
thing.
And
This
sometimes
is
you
this
come
is
up-
the obvious thing that's going to happen,
Yeah.
and then from there you work it down into hopefully something that becomes a bit more interesting
Absolutely.
and original.
You've got to not be judgmental. I mean, obviously you are. I mean, your mind's immediately going, that sounds crap. What the hell? You know, that's kind of like so many other. You're just copying that person. All these things going through in your mind, but you just got to keep going and just keep trying, because if you don't decide on something, you won't get anywhere. So you kind of need to record something, and then you need to go a little bit further. And it's that whole process of actually just taking things and just, okay, I'm going to compose something really crap today. It's almost that kind of thing. You've got to okay, fine. Well, I'm going to write something really shit. Okay, let's get down to it.
It's like failure is part of the process.
It
if
is
you're
part
not
of the
willing
process.
to fail, you're not going to get moving. That's the only way you move forward. Is by getting it wrong,
Absolutely.
tweaking it, keep going, and eventually things might start to make sense. But unless you get moving and do something, however, like you say, crap, you're not moving. And I think this holds back a lot of creative people.
It does.
Because they want to get it right first time.
Absolutely.
And then they don't do it. Because there's too much fear involved in the process. I think that's really interesting to hear it from a composer's point of view.
And it's always getting yourself. It's like with the improvising. You've got to start somewhere. You've just got to start playing. You need to improvise every day. And there is a book called Becoming a Music Library Writer, but which is a really good book. He recommended, and I've read it as well. And it's that process of just getting started. You need to do it every day. Even if it's really bad, just do it every day.
But that's like, I guess like any discipline, just being willing, no matter how you feel about it, what internal voice is criticizing you, you get going.
But it's even more difficult in the creative area, because the problem is, the creative area is very critical.
So you've now composed your first feature film.
Yeah.
And that's obviously been an interesting experience to work on something so experimental.
Yes, yeah.
What are your plans for the future? Are you going to be composing any more films? Have you got any project you're trying to get off the ground? What are you looking forward to moving forward?
I hope, of course, for more films, because I've loved the process of the film, and of course it's the thing I like the most. There are a couple of things. There's one which is a musical fable dance, which I composed when I was teaching down in Southeast London. Now I've composed the first 2 acts of it. It's called Reptilian Allure. So I've got the name of it, and
is there David Icke involved in that?
No. I know, it's really funny. I came up with a name, then I learned further about David Icke, but it's got no relation at all.
What advice would you give? Because obviously it's very hard to get into film composing.
Yes.
Lots of people want to get into that. We have people writing to us all the time, like, can we compose music for your latest project or whatever? And obviously you can't work with many people, and you have the people you work with.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people wanting to get into film music, writing film music or composing?
So I do think it's important with having some form of plan B, preferably in the line of what you want to go into, which would be with the composing side. So it could be some form of teaching, whatever it might be. Because the great thing is, you can still develop, like when I was teaching music, I was actually composing the musical fable dance. This is my main form of creation. So I think it's very important to have something else to bring in the money. You've got to bring in the money no matter what. And if you're immediately expecting to be taken on for films, it's a very difficult road. So I'd recommend that you do have plan B, so that you can actually bring in the money, and then you can dedicate as much time as you can to your composing. And also the other side, I would have said, if you come from the classical side, work on digital audio workstations. For classical people, I would recommend that. You can still use your classical skills, obviously take it further, but it's sort of breaking away and breaking your patterns to take it further.
Well, thanks very much, Benedict. It's been a fantastic discussion. What do you hope will be the response when people see this film, Black Daruma?
I hope that they, well, I mean, certainly from the music side, they will pick up the spirit, as it were, the Black Daruma spirit, which is quite a threatening spirit. But it's almost like with the, there's a horror side, the horror side of a little doll, which again, of course, it is a form of doll, but it's almost like that element, that eerie element. My father-in-law, for example, is really good at making, those houses, doll houses. He's really skilled at it, and he was a priest before anything, but makes these doll houses. And it was quite funny. I remember looking at one of the doll houses on the top floor and mentioning it to my wife, and it was like the character had a slightly askew eye. And I just thought, this is like so much like a horror. It's like Psycho. Everything's fine, and then you go to the shot on the wall. Everything seems fine, and then you've got the slightly eerie element. And it's kind of the same sort of thing. It's kind of, I hope they pick up that it's not obvious, but it's just underneath building. So I hope they particularly pick up that element and experience the whole process.
That's great. Thanks so much for coming down.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And hopefully being in this cellar wasn't too scary for you.
No. I when you first said in the cellar, I was a bit like, oh my golly, that's in the film. But no, it's great. I like the brickwork as well. It's just ideal. It's ideal.
Do you think you'll be using your cellar in a more interesting way from
it's
now
got
on?
me started thinking. I should definitely put it to better use.
New studio, perhaps.
Yes.